Hello and welcome to our session today entitled Investment Banking Deal Making in 2021 Using Technology and Relationships. Our goal today is really to discuss the shift in operations and some of how technology is being used in investment banking to adapt to the market changes created by 18 months of dealing with a pandemic, now dealing with hybrid workforces, continued digital transformation, what I would describe as a very busy market right now. My name is Paul Ross. I'm head of marketing here at Affinity. For those of you not familiar with Affinity, we provide a relationship intelligence-driven CRM for deal makers in private capital, investment banking, and other relationship-driven sales industries. Today, I'm actually joined by Michael Lamb, co-founder and managing partner at Corporate Advisory Solutions. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and Corporate Advisory Services?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Corporate Advisory Solutions is a boutique investment and merchant banking firm that specializes in tech-enabled outsourced business services. We tend to work with companies that are in the, the lower middle market, businesses that are generating anywhere on the low end, 10 to 20 million of revenues, upwards to companies generating 2 to 300 million of revenue. We have our business has a global footprint. We work with companies all over the globe, but most of our transaction or M&A work is done in the U.S.
Awesome, thank you, Michael. So, I think it's fair to say that, like many of the people in our audience today, your organization has kind of built its business on, as you described, very specialist expertise in specific markets. And obviously in the relationships that you built in those industries. Historically, investment banking, we've been a very face-to-face, relationship-driven industry. Now we've had like 18 months of experience of not really being able to get face-to-face and meet people. I'd love to hear how you as an organization have kind of adapted to that, because I know us as an organization, we are doing our first face-to-face event next week. And I'm actually in our office for the first time here doing an event. But how did things change in terms of how you did operations, and specifically in terms of adapting to not having those face-to-face ongoing relationships with organizations?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Paul. We immediately had to pivot, along with a lot of our peers that do investment banking work, into a virtual environment very quickly. Not only were we out of our office and out of our comfort zone, we entered a remote environment where our staff, our clients, and everything else was virtual. And as a result of that, when the pandemic hit, most, if not all, of our transactions went on hold, Paul. Literally everything stopped until people could figure out what the game plan was. And so we started to move into a virtual deal environment, and we ended up closing several of our transactions in that given year. They were 100% virtual, no face-to-face interaction.
So that's a very big change for you. I've got on the screen here, in Affinity, this big list of people for engagement on the seller side. We've got an equivalent one for buyers. How did you actually engage with those people during that model where you weren't able to do those kind of face-to-face engagements that you were previously doing?
We were using, very similar to this program we're on right now, we were living on Zoom and doing all of the interactions that way. We even had scenarios where, when we were typically doing an on-site facility tour or meeting, we were recording that ahead of time and videoing it and sharing that with the buyer prospects, whether it was a financial sponsor or a strategic buyer, to give them insights into the operations. So we needed to really think through, out of the box, how we were going to run transactions and continue to close them and still build that rapport, trust, and get that comfort around the financials as well as the operational side. And it wasn't easy at first, but it began to become a huge benefit. When you think about what the typical process is when you're running a sell-side engagement and how travel intensive it typically is. The virtual world has become much more efficient and less costly.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that we've all seen across industries overall. I think one of the interesting things to me is you mentioned like how you were able to continue to close deals, which is I'm sure very tough in that opening period, and continues to be a bit challenging. But how about in terms of building your pipeline and staying engaged with folks that would be potential buyers or sellers down the line?
So what we did was once we realized that we weren't, all of our conferences and our travel was being canceled rapidly. I can't tell you how many conferences, as well as flight credits I received from American Airlines or tried to from all the cancellations. But we immediately went into a digital environment. So we hired a digital marketing person. We started thinking about how we were going to keep in front of our prospects, and that became kind of our. I led the charge from our team to really make sure that we were in front of digitally as much as we possibly could with our target markets. And the Affinity system was a big help in terms of how we were rolling out our digital strategy at that time.
Awesome. I know that you were able to kind of like transition that way. I'd be interested to hear, like, I know that you kind of, when you took on Affinity originally, you kind of built up your contact list. I think it was almost double. You went from 8,000 to 17,000 contacts because you were able to kind of suck in all of the rest of the wider network that folks had. I'm sure this wasn't just about like you emailing people and doing those things. You must have had to curate a lot of this, work out what your kind of engagement model was, whether that was like social or other. How did you actually manage to deal with that, given that you're talking about 17,000 contacts potentially that you were working on?
Yeah, the first thing we did once we got all of our emails and contacts into Affinity was we started to figure out, we began to filter it down to break them into buckets. And as I mentioned earlier, we're very much specialized in tech-enabled business services. So we have different coverage areas. So we were able to break out our coverage markets and tag them and figure out different digital engagement strategies with each of our market segments. Doing just blanket marketing messaging is in our world old school. People still do it, but we try to really focus in on what does our audience, what are they looking for? What knowledge are they looking for? What information are they looking for when they are thinking about a decision around selling or buying a business? And we try to focus in as much as we can around the content that is valuable for them, because in our world, Paul, we don't just meet somebody tomorrow and then they're ready to go to buy or sell. It may be a 3-year courting process before we're even doing anything with them proactively. So we want to get them thinking and nurturing that relationship to the point where come 2 to 3 years from now, whether we see them in person or not, they know us, they know our firm, and they know our capabilities. And that's kind of the way we were thinking of it without the face-to-face interaction that we usually have.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I always think about when we're talking about Affinity and your use of the CRM is kind of being able to track that over time. I'm guessing that that was one of the big things that you were able to do, was being able to actually, as you switch to this volume of being much more like a target marketing machine almost, that you were tracking those engagements over time, and that must have become a pretty important thing to you overall.
It was, because for us, it wasn't just, being that I lead the business development, relationship management side of our business. I not only needed to make sure that I was up to speed on what was going on, but so did the rest of our deal team. And so having a system that was interactive, where you could put information in and easily share it, where it's not overly complex, was a very important piece to the equation, because when you're looking at managing a small team of people, like many of us do in investment banking, you cannot everybody needs to be in the know. They need to understand kind of what is going on with that prospect before it becomes a client, or it will never become a client if you don't have the
Right.
full
Yeah.
understanding of the situation.
Absolutely. And how do you see these changes? So we're like, heading into middle of the summer, fall 2021 here with, everything's opening up. Like as I said, I'm in our corporate offices here. Is this going to be the model that you're going to use going forward? Like, what did you learn that you're going to be able to scale with going forward?
Yeah, we're not going to just move back into face-to-face interaction in conferences, trade shows, and leave behind the digital strategies that we learned through COVID. We're going to continue to apply them, but more on a hybrid model. So we want to
Okay.
be able to not only foster relationships in person, which is a huge part of what we do on a regular basis, but we also want to be able to efficiently stay in front of our target markets and use the marketing to drive our decisions to meet and travel and get together with people. So what we're working to do is get a lot smarter and more intelligent on the decisions we're making when it comes to determining whether a company should be a prospect or not, well before we see them in person.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be saving you a lot more money as well as just time in terms of engagement. I think one of the interesting things here, I'm just looking at your record within our Affinity system. I'm not going to share anything too secret here, but being able to track whether people are really engaged, understanding what's actually happening with them. Has somebody kind of come in and see here our ability to track the kind of the history that you were describing. I'm sure that's going to make a pretty big difference. So we focused here a lot on building and maintaining relationships in this new model. But obviously, the whole thing you mentioned at the start of this was that it was about obviously deal making and closing and all of those things. How do you kind of think about using your CRM for that today? We've talked a lot about the number of contacts and all of those things that you've been able to suck in, but like, how do you use your CRM today in this model to make sure that you're on top of that deal pipeline?
Yeah, so we're very much, from an analysis perspective, developing trackers on even before a company becomes a client, how we got there, right? Because there's a whole story to bringing on a client, right? All the information, what you learn about the owner's brother's cousin sister that works in the business, Paul. I mean, it goes, but it's not only the knowledge that I need to have in my head, it's the knowledge our deal team needs to have. So being able to share that inside of a protected and secure area where we can share those notes and information to be able to manage the workflow up to the point where we submit a proposal, a fee agreement, and then sign them up is kind of part one of the battle. And then part two is obviously execution and utilizing the system to make sure that we're on top of all of the engagements that we are managing on a monthly, quarterly basis out in the marketplace.
So one of the themes that we hear a lot, definitely on the private capital side, and I think more and more on the investment banking side as well, is the speed of opportunities and speed of deals is really just accelerating. The VC side, it's kind of somewhat extreme with like introduction of Tyco Global's model. But are you seeing the same thing happening on the investment banking side?
Absolutely. We do not, where the way our financial model works is we're ultimately, getting a retainer and then a back-end success fee. The back-end success fee is where money is made in investment banking. So having deals that are slower or take more time doesn't work for our financial model. We're ultimately always looking for ways to speed up and enhance that process, because the sooner it closes, the better, obviously, for us from a self-interest perspective, but also for the client too, because as they say, Paul, things happen when you're out in the marketplace dealing with a living, breathing company. Stuff happens, not always good, but bad. And the longer you're in the market, the longer the process takes, the lower probability of a deal happening.
Makes total sense. I know that this is something you're looking at as you go forward with your use of Affinity, but one of the big things that we've focused on here recently is adding in much more kind of analytics to that deal pipeline, like how many transactions are going, where they are in the stages, but also like it was a really interesting point you made earlier around these relationships that lead to a deal could be 2-3 years in production. So really understanding what's actually happening in terms of outreach and engagement to people, really makes a big difference, I think, as well, to how things are operating. Just as we kind of come to a close here, Michael, I'd love to get a sense from you, kind of what was your driver to actually adopt Affinity? What was the reason that you felt like you needed to switch from what you were doing previously to this new model with Affinity?
We were, Paul, for years, we were on a CRM, the Salesforce CRM. And the one thing I learned from just dealing with Salesforce was that they are a heck of a company. I mean, you could just look at their market cap and you could see that. But the challenge is for a small business, we're 10 people altogether. I don't necessarily know whether a CRM like that with all the bells and whistles that's more geared to a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 corporation is right for a company like us in the market that we were in. And that's what got us really thinking before COVID was, what do we need to do, or what kind of system is out there that really could meet our needs and begin to help us think differently about our business and how we were doing, how we were running our deals and how we were handling our marketing. And ultimately, Affinity met a lot of those, checked off a lot of those boxes for us, because we needed something that was going to help us with data entry and scale and analysis and tracking KPIs. And all of those things began to kind of mesh well once we started demoing and implementing the product.
Got it. I hear it a lot of times when I speak to managing directors and managing partners like yourself, that a big part of it is like removing the manual data entry that you were talking about. Like I know that you did a case study for us a while back, and you talked about adding almost doubling the contacts that you had in your CRM to be marketing to, as you pointed out. That would clearly have been a very manual process previously, but the automation of capturing all of those things and building that seems to be a big theme that I hear consistently. And the other thing is I also hear a lot about this is actually something that your team uses compared with trying to avoid.
Paul, we before we decided to move on from the other platform over to Affinity, we really we made it clear with our team. We were like, guys, we've got to live and breathe in this system. Everything's got to go into it. And everyone nodded their heads and said, yep. But ultimately, now that we've been on it for a while, people are doing that. They are in it, updating it, putting information in. We're running all of our marketing through it. And it's really been a really big help in terms of where we're headed with our company and our digital marketing strategies.
Awesome. That's really great. I appreciate you saying that, but also us being able to help you through that journey. So just to kind of wrap this up, Michael, thank you so much for your time. We will definitely be taking questions offline for today's session. So if you do have questions, feel free to email us at marketing@affinity.co. Very happy to take any specific questions that you have there. But with that, Michael, I want to thank you again for spending the time with us. This was really enlightening and hopefully helpful to all of your peers. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you again.
Thank you.